Welcome to our channel. This is Yvonne from Ginger Chick Rehab, and along with my husband Chris, we do thrift flips. We take unwanted, unloved, outdated thrift store finds and then we give them new life. And on our channel, we share the process with you all. So today's video is going to be a wall decor riser flip. So these are items that we run across when we are out thrifting. I absolutely loved this pair. This is still trending now, so I was surprised to find this pair. Maybe it was just because it was black, it was too rusted, somebody moved, I don't know, but I was definitely happy to come across a set of these arches. What do you all think about this set? I just absolutely love all those little pieces of wood, all those little pieces of metal they have raised areas that I know will just distress beautifully. So a pair, you can sell them separately, you can sell them together. And I have to say, I haven't done a wall clock in a long time, and this one actually has been in our hoard, got pushed back behind something, and I'm like, hey, I need to get this in the booth. And then this primitive checkerboard has done its time. I don't know if you can see it all, but it has been painted and then repainted. They didn't sand down the original paint job, so it is in dire need. And then this cutting board was given to us by a friend for our birthdays back in July. Finally came up with that inspiration of what to do to it. Yep, sometimes you just have to keep it in your hoard until you figure it out, but look at how thick that is. And then this is that broken up piece from Hobby Lobby that I took you all thrifting with me, and you went into Hobby Lobby and I'm like, yeah, for $5, yes please, I will take this and fix it. And then this is another piece from one of the thrifting adventures, and I was just like, it's just missing something. There's so much glass showing. I don't know why the wording is so small, but the wording is actually in between two pieces of glass, so I can change that wording. So I'm excited about this piece also. Then we have this metal ABC piece. It's a home interior piece. It just needs some updating, and a couple unwanted signs that just need some new signage. And then when I saw these two little pieces, I was like, oh, I love that thick wood. Can I sand that black off? Can I take that finial off? So right off the bat, I knew some of these metal pieces were not stuck on anymore, but luckily they were still there, so that was a bonus. So I'm just using some E6000 right from the get-go here to get that so it will set up. And then I'm going to be removing the finials right off the top of these. And to my surprise, it was actually a finial and a double-sided screw. I'm like, oh, the screw didn't come out. So to save my fingers, because that really hurt, because I thought, well, maybe I can just unscrew it with my fingers. Ouch. So I did grab some pliers to start twisting it. It did come out, but it did take a little bit of muscles. The idea that I have for this primitive checkerboard is not to be hanging on the wall anymore, so I need to remove the hanging system that is on here. So for this piece, when I thrifted it, I knew that I could remove that house by removing these nuts. So for this glass frame, it has these 3 knobs at the bottom. I absolutely love that. I don't think me personally wouldn't use it like for a coat rack, but what a nice place to hang some decor. A simple little wreath would look nice. So I'm going to remove these so I can paint them separately. So now that I have the knobs removed, I'm going to be removing the glass, only to find out that it is 2 panes of glass. I can only remove the one. The front glass is actually glued in place, so I'm not even going to attempt to try to remove that. Then I'm just going to be using my razor blade scraper. It actually was paint on. I kind of thought it was vinyl, but I can just scrape it right off. And though somebody put a lot of work into these and they were very cute for a baby shower, maybe, I'm thinking, but we are going to try to sand all that black off, all that writing. While we're sanding, we'll be doing this sign and that very pink sign also, just getting the writing off of it and getting it, just sanding it so it's smooth and that it has a nice prepped surface. So our friend actually had thrifted this for us for our birthday, so that was really nice. So finally came up with the idea of cutting those off and using it as a riser. So Chris is just cutting off where it probably had like 3 different bowls for condiments, but at that it was just a piece of wood. So to match up the rounds, as you see, what he did is just place the pieces that he cut off, and now he's going to be tracing them with a pencil and then cutting that round with a jigsaw so they will match. I have to say this was a really nice piece. It actually had screwed in little plastic pieces, but you know us thrifters, we're going to save the pieces. You may need them for something else. So now to smooth out that edge and get where the table saw, sometimes the table saws will leave burn marks. So he's just taking it to his sander and getting those sanded nice and smooth and then sanding off where the table saw had left a burn mark. So this piece was definitely well loved, but what is hidden with the dark paint when we paint this white will be like a detail we're trying to show off. So I'm going in with some Durham water putty and filling any of those deep holes or marks. So the hardest part with this piece was getting those very weak staples out. I thought I could tap them through like you normally do with a staple like this, but all it was doing was bending. So I ended up just having to cut them flush. That was basically the only answer, and then trying to pry them out of the back. So since the other three pieces were stapled on, Chris is stapling this piece back on also. You don't really want to point out that you are fixing a broken piece by nailing it. If you have the tools to match it up, I personally think it's best to do that. Now, because this piece has raised edges and you have to get in little corners where we put that Durham water putty, I have to say this little Black & Decker corner hand sander comes in perfect for that. So we made it this far. We got all the pieces assessed. We have them sanded. We have them prepped, any holes filled. This is just part of the flipping process, just fixing these items so they are at the best quality. So as this is the second part of the prep is cleaning all the pieces, just some super clean and a hot bucket of water, wiping everything down. Get your paint to adhere properly. You need to get any grime, grease, any kind of cleaners that might be on any of these pieces off so it takes the paint properly. So we're going to be using our Graco sprayer on these pieces. So we have them all on little boards that we use to carry in and out of our spray room. So we're going to start right off with spraying all these items black. We're using that ready to use flat black Onyx right off the shelf from Walmart. So I have to say, using that sprayer, wow, does it cut down the painting time. And now that that side is dry, we can flip it over and do the other sides if it is needed. So for these two metal pieces, I do not feel at all that that black Onyx ready to use is the right paint to adhere to metal. So I contact papered off. Yep, I hoard all that scrap pieces to be able to use for projects like this and taped off the area of the clock because it was unable to be removed. And now I'm just painting these metal items with the Rust-Oleum paint and primer in the flat black. So after the Rust-Oleum paint is dry, I'm moving on to seal that paint in with some polyacrylic. I'm also going to be coating the rest of the painted black pieces with polyacrylic also. This is just going to seal in that black paint so when I go to distress the piece, that paint is good and on there. So for this glass frame piece, I'm just going to go in with some Waverly ink chalk paint. This is going to be a one coat coverage and then I can move on. Then I will seal that in using some polyacrylic. So now it's on to painting some of these pieces white, and we're using the Kilz paint and primer, still using that Graco sprayer. When it comes to the sprayer, you just have to water it down just a little bit. Those little Dixie cups that you use when you brush your teeth, are perfect. Just a couple little cups and the gallon of paint, and it just is a nice, so nice to have a sprayer to be able to get all these little pieces and parts. How much time would this have taken to use a paintbrush on? So I know if you're like me, you cannot pass up a clearance. Look at this. This had been spilled. It was still completely full. It was on a Walmart clearance for $9. God wink moment. I always wanted to try this Rust-Oleum. It had been suggested to me. So this is a perfect opportunity. We could not get the bottom of these completely sanded off. So I'm going to be covering it up with some of this Rust-Oleum white chalk paint. So of course I've got to keep on testing it, so I'm going to go ahead and do this frame also. So these are some riser feet that I knew that I was going to need for those heavy pieces of wood to make them into risers. Definitely was going to need something that was going to be substantially and being able to be screwed in. So these pieces I actually got ordered online through Lowe's. I have found them in my local Lowe's before on a rare find, but I was so blessed when I'm like, oh, I can order them online, come in a set of 2. The 2-pack is less than $3, so very cost efficient for us flippers to use these as riser feet. And I didn't feel the need to paint these black first. They are the feet. I didn't plan on distressing them. I'm trying to keep this cost efficient. I feel that the white is going to be good enough, and it is a very dry wood, so it's soaking into this Rust-Oleum paint. So I'm thinking I'm only going to need 1 coat just to cover them. So yes, I actually envisioned this as a riser also. So these are some legs. Unfortunately, I can't link anything because there's a gentleman that turns these types of items that has a booth where we have our booth at. So we love to support him, and these were a perfect shape, and I definitely can envision them as the legs on these risers. So I'm actually going in with the Waverly ink chalk paint because I know that this will be a 1 coat coverage, and I actually got a couple questions on if the ink paint matched up with the black Onyx paint, so we're going to be giving that a try also. So I'm just going in with a paintbrush where any of that overspray happened when we painted the top white, knowing that we're going to keep these feet black. So I have to say that, yep, that ink paint is matching up this black Onyx perfectly. So I was just testing that out. So I'm finishing up the piece just using the black Onyx for any little spits and spatters that might have happened. And then I'll just go over to seal that Waverly ink paint in also with this black Onyx. Yes, I could have used the polyacrylic, but why not? I have the Onyx right here. So now I'm on to my second coat, and let's see what happens here. I've never used this paint. I'm just using it right out of the can. I do like the Waverly because I could pour it in a bowl and use it. So we will see how this goes. It seems to be covering up with the second coat very well. So let's test this out on the metal pieces. I planned on using a chalk paint on these metal pieces anyway because I love the way that chalk paint distresses on my metal and then shows that black through. So I have to say the first coat just goes on so very smooth. And yep, I'm going to be using it on this metal clock also. See where that contact paper just came in so handy. I could cut the edges off and protect that glass that's on this clock. Are you all like that? Do you save all your pieces and parts of random stuff So you could have thrown it in the trash, but I could throw it in the trash now after I'm done using it. So what went on nice and smooth on the wood piece, I have to say, did not go on nice and smooth on the metal piece, because of course metal is, the paint is just sitting there, it's not soaking into anything. So then I remembered a tip that viewers gave me about dipping my brush in water. So I'm dipping the brush in the paint and then dipping it in a little bit of water to wet it down, and that seems to be making the smooth coverage. I know chalk paint's supposed to be texture, but I'm always looking for that smooth, but I do love how it distresses on metal, so this is going to work. That's why I said I like that Waverly, that I can pour it in a bowl and then add water, because I know you don't want to contaminate. I don't really like contaminating my paint, but then I feel like I waste half of it when I pour it out of a can. Now this was covered in 2 coats. It is dry. That's the nice thing about chalk paint. It does dry fast. So I'm going in and I'm just using some 220 sandpaper and then showing some of that black that I pre-painted and polyacryliced in. And now I'm going in with these wet wipes, just smoothing out any texture that was left on the flat surface, and maybe going in where I just sanded a little bit to remove a little bit more of the paint. It's just you just do what's pleasing to your eye, and this is what's pleasing to my eye. I like to see all those sharp edges, and I like my pieces to be distressed. So I'm going in with that wet wipe on these metal pieces, going in where all the ABCs, these little swirlies are. Now I have to say that it is taking off a little bit more paint than I'm used to. I was used to that Waverly chalk paint being a lot harder to take off, but I guess it's just something that you have to get used to. I had to get used to how to do the Waverly paint distressing also. So if it takes off too much, I can always add paint back on. Going in on this clock with that same type of wet wipe and just rubbing it off. The wet wipes are actually some clearance antibacterial wipes. They were like $1 at Target. Can't help it. I thought, well, that's perfect for the workshop to, when we don't have water in our workshop, so it's nice to have something that's already wet. I've seen other people use baby wipes, so I thought, well, these will work. So I've had good luck using the Varathane finishing wax in the clear to seal in the Waverly chalk paint. So let's see how it does with this Rust-Oleum. And I have to say, on the wooden items, it is doing real nice. Just sealing that chalk paint in. Yep, chalk paint you have to seal in. It will always keep coming off if you don't get that sealed in. But what worked for the wood, oh my goodness, did not work for my metals. I don't know if you can tell, but I could tell right away as soon as I started to wipe this Varathane wax on my metal items. It started removing way too much of that chalk paint. So, okay, take that clean wipe off that Varathane wax and start all over. Yep, contact paper on, repaint the piece. Hey, everything is a trial and error when it comes to DIYing. Well, I'm going to say to seal my metal pieces in with the Rust-Oleum, I'm just going to seal them in with some polyacrylic. So to take a little bit of that texture from the polyacrylic off, I had thrifted these Grows Collaborative sponges, and I liked them because I knew that I could sand a little bit of that texture off, kind of like a steel wool, but you can't steel wool white because it will turn it gray. And I've tried the green scouring pads and the same thing, it turns it green. So perfect. This was a blessing to find them, and all that's doing is just taking that spray feeling off of it before I Varathane wax over it. So I want to darken up this wood a little bit, so I'm using that Waverly antiquing wax and a wee bit of that ink just to darken up that Waverly and some water. This board has been pre-sanded, so there shouldn't be any of the original finish left on it, or even if it was used as a cutting board, all those marks are off. So now I'm just going in and rubbing it into the wood, letting this mixture soak in. Now this was pretty light wood to begin with, so I'm going in with a second coat to achieve the darkness I was looking for. I could have mixed it up a little bit stronger, but it's better to play it safe. It's easier to add more on than try to take it off if it gets too dark. I'm going in and using the same mixture on the other two riser boards, also trying to very gingerly keep it off the white on the bottom. If I have to touch up, then that's okay. I already had Varathane wax the bottom anyway, so that should protect that white paint. I didn't see the crack on this board until I started waxing it, so it just stuck out like a detail I was trying to show off. So part of the Starbond system is that it has this colored glue that's kind of like a dark epoxy. So I'm actually going to go in and use some of the Starbond glue that is the dark, almost black brown, and fill in this big crack. And what you do is you just pour some on, or put some in, use the dryer. 15 seconds later it's dry, and then I'll keep doing this process until it fills that gap. And then I'll go ahead and hand sand the piece. I tried not to raise that up above the grain too much. I didn't really want to have to go back in and get the orbital sander and sand the whole thing, so I'm just going to sand it by hand. And then after I get it nice and smooth, you can see where I took the Waverly wax off mixture, and now I'm just going to go back in and apply some more. Yep, it did get a little bit darker in the spot that I sanded, but that's okay because I'm going to be putting the stencil on top of it, and so that will choose where my placement is. I much rather have that crack filled than have the crack left behind. For this Hobby Lobby piece, the color doesn't do anything for me. It shows too many knots. The knots are okay, so I'm going to go in with the same mixture. And I know that this wood is really dry too, and that it's going to probably go really dark. So now it's on to attaching the legs. So Chris is centering each leg so that it is even on the bottom of the piece. So now he's pre-drilling the holes using a drill bit just a little bit smaller than what the screws are, so it has a nice tight fit once he screws them in. And this also, pre-drilling helps prevent cracking of the wood also. Now the best option for this board to attach the legs is to pre-drill a hole through the board and then attach the leg with a screw. That way, this is a long board, the legs are skinny, glue would not be sufficient enough just to hold on securely. So for us, that's the best way to make sure that these legs don't come off. So he's going in with some spackle, that spackle that's pink, that turns white when it's dry, to cover up where he put those screws in, and then after it's dry, he'll have to sand it, and with a little bit of touch-up paint to finish it off. So now for the boards that I'm going to be putting the stencil on, I'm going to be pre-distressing these, pre-sanding these, getting any of the brush marks off, showing some of that black on those edges through, and getting these pieces all distressed. Oh, and you know that I'm going to go in and have to individually distress each one of these little pieces of blocks. But first I'm just going in and getting all that raised edge of those metal pieces all brought out so we can see all that beautiful detail in that metal. And then, yep, I'm just going to work my way around through every one of the piece on both sides, going in between those cracks. This is not a piece that I could take the orbital sander and go to town and let it distress. It would have chipped off any of that metal. Just sit back and relax and get it sanded so it looks good. You just keep doing something till it's pleasing to your eye. But luckily for these two pieces, I can go in with the orbital sander. I left them rough. They were rough when we bought them. I knew that they were going to be those pieces that will really distress. So I'm just going in with the orbital sander and letting it get this piece nice and distressed. And Chris is finishing these pieces up by sealing and protecting that paint with some Varathane finishing wax. Not always an easy task when you have all these pieces and parts, but I will say that the waxing brush does come in handy. So now I can go in and get some stenciling done. So I am taped off this area. This way I can make sure that I'm staying centered. I just imagine this being a nice, simple welcome sign. So I go into my design studio on my Cameo Silhouette 3. I pick out this simple little wreath that has where you can put some writing in, and I'm just looking for a welcome. So I'm taking this welcome and I'm removing it to our home and just using the welcome and fitting it into that space. So after getting this all weeded out, I have to tell you, I weeded it wrong. I really meant to do it as an area that I was going to paint, but after it was already done, I'm like, okay, so it's going to vinyl. It's going to be, I hate wasting a product. I'm sure you all do too. So I just used my transfer tape, which is my Duck brand clear contact paper, to remove my stencil to be able to transfer it from the cutout piece to the board. For that longer board, I just wanted this farmer's market and this fun little font. So to fill up the whole board, I wanted to separate the two words. That way I could apply them separately and I could fill up that whole mat and be able to cut them out and then be able to attach them separately, filling up this whole space. So for my stencil color, I'm just going in with the Apple Barrel Multi-Use in black, using a makeup sponge from the Dollar Tree store. And I just like to go in with that dry technique where you have just a little bit paint on that sponge. That way you're not squishing it underneath the stencil no matter how hard I rubbed and made sure that it was attached and good and sealed. I rather go over with multiple coats than try to put on one coat and have it squish underneath the stencil. And then after applying 3 coats, drying with a blow dryer in between coats to make sure that it's good and dry. And then I also use the assistance of the blow dryer to heat up that vinyl to reactivate that sticky so that the vinyl pulls off without pulling off my white paint. And then I like to go back in with a boutonniere pin that I get off Amazon to grab all those little pieces and parts from the lettering. Now remember, when you're doing this, you're not digging a hole. You don't want to dig into that paint. You just want to grab onto that vinyl. So now I'm onto these risers. Boy, do I love the way these heavy risers turned out. So I'm just putting some flowers on these risers. I love the pop of white over that Waverly antiquing wax. I let that sit up overnight. So these are the flowers that I picked. I've done this in the past with another tray and it sold right away. So why not keep doing what sells? So I'm just sizing appropriate. I'm just going to be cutting 2 of each flower out, 1 type of flower for each of the risers. The one flower was, of course, very easy to weed. Just go in, pick up one of the pieces. It all ended up being attached. And it's like, yay for weeding this one. This one was easy. Okay, so this one, not so much. So I go in with my little boutonniere pin. I'm grabbing all those little bitty pieces one by one. So not that I didn't want to show you this, but apparently I didn't hit my camera on, that I took an extra piece of vinyl, laid it on top of the image, hoping that it would grab all those little pieces up. People had suggested this to me. I have to say that it did grab some of them, but then when you went down to get the rest of them, then it left some of them that you already picked up behind. And then it also stretched the vinyl, because vinyl always seems to stretch. So I can't say that it extremely helped. I did go back in with a little bitty piece to get all the little dots in the middle, and that seemed to be working, but I probably still will just use my boutonniere pin because I don't want to stretch that vinyl again. Then I transferred it to my piece of contact paper, that Duck brand contact paper that I use for transfer tape. I'm making one of the whole flowers be on the riser top itself, and then I'm going to cut the other one in half. And then now I'm going to take that third half, or the third piece, and lay it on the other open side. So this is just a kind of nice flowing area. It's just figure out what direction you want to put it. It's kind of nice because it doesn't have to be perfect. So the nice thing about having a monthly subscription is that I don't have to keep using the same flower pattern over again. So I chose this for the larger riser. So the outer edge of most of this design just peeled right up, but it had all those little pieces and parts of the flower petal that I had to go in very gingerly because they were grabbing up a little bit. And then this is just one of those things when it comes to weeding, to take your time so you get that complete design. So I'm going in with Apple Barrel Multi-Use in white, and that's what I'm going to be coloring the stencil on these pieces. Like I said earlier, I just love the way that white pops against this Waverly wax color. So I'm using one of the makeup sponges from the Dollar Tree store, just doing that dry technique, just a little bit of paint on there, going in very lightly, not to smush it underneath the stencil. I'm hoping the stencil is good and on there and it's not bleeding under. So this is my second coat. I'm just kind of showing you all three of them without having to show you all three of them separately. In between the coats, I do use assistance of the blow dryer to help dry the paint, and then put my third coat on. I just want that white to pop, so I want to get as much coverage as I can. And then just like the other signs, I'm going to go back in with that heat of the blow dryer to release that sticky. That just helps remove that vinyl off just so much more easily. So I'm just warning you, as we start this riser, there's going to be 3 different techniques that I'm using on this riser. Just a warning in case you're like, oh my gosh, what the heck is she doing? So I'm starting off with masking tape. So I am not doing buffalo check. I am just doing your basic check pattern. I want a background. This is a lot of white area. So I'm just starting off with that 1-inch dollar store tape. So I'm putting one down permanently all the way to the edge. This is my centerpiece. Laying another one, butting it right up to there. The next one, getting it all the way level, keeping it level the whole way down. Using my fingernail to make it go into the edge. And then I'm removing that tape and I'll work the whole way down. So now I'm going to flip my tape and I'm going to go the opposite way, doing the same thing, but going the opposite way. Put that piece of tape, butt it right up, remove the middle tape, get it butted right up to the other piece of tape, and lay that other piece of masking tape right down, just working my whole way all the way down again. Now, as you see, I have a little bitty white squares ready to be painted. So I'm using the light gray, the Apple Barrel Multi-Use, a makeup sponge from the dollar store, and just a dry technique where there's just a little bit of paint on there. I don't want it to smush. I tried to rub that masking tape on that board as best as I could, and then I will go over it about 3 times using a blow dryer in between coats to get it thoroughly dry. Now that I've got my 3 coats, that is for coverage because of how light the color is. I'm using the heat of the blow dryer just to release that sticky on that tape so I don't pull off the white that I do not want to come off. So unlike the buffalo check that sometimes gets really confusing once you start removing tape, look at here. All I do with that masking tape is make sure that it's level, going the whole way down, covering up those gray squares that I painted, and then same thing with my fingernail, just getting it into the edge. The check's a little bit easier than the buffalo check, so just make sure that it's even all the way down on the paint that you have already painted. And yep, now you go the opposite way. The same thing. Get that masking tape, make sure that's level, make sure it's covering up those gray squares. Now I'm going to cut the excess masking tape off. I know it was long, it was just easier for me to grab and get a hold of, but I need something for the edge, so I'm going to cut off all these little pieces and run it around that edge, where I didn't really need it for the edge for the first one because the paint was butted right up to that edge, but now I want not to paint that edge that's going up. So now the same thing with the paint. I'm going in with that dry technique where there's just a little bit of paint on that makeup sponge, and I'll be going over it 3 times just like I did the first one. And yep, go back to that blow dryer, let that blow dryer heat up that tape so it doesn't pull off my white paint, and get all that tape removed. Oh yes, this was oddly satisfying. I just absolutely love doing this. Is the first time I've ever done this, by the way, you guys. So now I'm going in and distressing your piece. If you know me, I like my pieces to look a little bit aged. So I don't want it to be such a crisp gray. I know that I wanted that color to be the color that it should have been. There's a difference between having a color that's not completely covered and then distressing a color. So after removing the sanding dust, I'm going to seal this gray in with some of this clear acrylic spray. This is just what I have in a house. Whatever you have is fine. Just a clear spray. I'm going to be putting a stencil on top of this, so I don't want it to pull that gray up. And then I just have to share with you that the design studio on the Cameo actually has a check pattern, but what fun would that be? That would be too easy. So I'm going in and I'm using the farmhouse font, not necessarily for the swirlies. I just want a little bit of writing in that long rectangle area. So I'm just going in and typing out farmhouse. Now this is a cursive font, so once I go in and I get it all typed out, I need to weld it together. My next design is for the center part. I just want a simple little wreath to put in the center. And I thought this one was very pretty with all the little leaves. I like the little points of the leaves on this one. So using my transfer tape and a ruler, measuring out each one of these vinyls. I'm using the vinyl as the stencil. I use that Oracle 651 just like I did previously. So I'll kind of fast forward to this part because you've really already seen me paint on a stencil. So same thing like I did the gray, I'm going in and sanding that. I want it to be a little bit, I don't want it to be as crisp a black. I want it to blend in and look aged. Okay, you guessed it. If you are IOD stamp fans, yep. I didn't want to say anything because I wasn't sure. Sometimes when you stencil out those wreaths, sometimes it's not going to fit, but luckily the chicken is going to fit. I was hoping it would. I measured for it to fit, but not always does it fit. So this is my third technique. Yep, doing the chicken. But I have to say my chicken is not attaching to my acrylic block anymore. I'm not really sure how to get it re-sticky. Does anybody have any ideas on that? So luckily it didn't make a mess when it dropped off that acrylic block. I could go in and push it down. Yep, I used that Stays On ink pad in black. I feel as if the black wreath is overpowering the very distressed chicken. So I'm going to go in and distress that wreath even more. Then I'll seal it in with the acrylic spray and then Varathane finishing wax. So next up is the piece of glass. This is that glass insert for that wood frame that we painted. And this is a second piece of glass. Instead of reversing my vinyl image, I thought it would just be best to just put it on the second piece of glass. So I have masking tape around the edges 2 inches, and then my center point's marked so I know where to center it. So I just wanted to keep a general saying. I really liked this one. This one caught my eye. This is just from the design store. I'm not taking it apart to add different letters or anything else to it. I'm taking it apart to be able to fit the whole size of the glass. So for the gathering place, I'm putting that right in the center. That's where those center marks helped. I measured off. Chris just happened to be in the house when I was getting ready to do this, or I would have tried the parchment paper, wax paper trick. But since he was here, hey, use the hands that God gave you to assist you. So he's helping me place it, because when you stick vinyl onto glass, boy, does it stick fast. The other two groupings I cut out separately also. I'm grabbing them one at a time, adding the and the lines up. That's where, yet again, that's why I came in 2 inches, so I knew that my lines were going to be touching, and I knew I was going to be staying center. So the bottom part was a little bit harder to place, only because the word place, the P came down into where friends become. And so we had to center that part. So it ended up being a little bit lower than I wanted. I still was able to center the stripes, so that was good, but I ended up having to remove that piece of tape because it came down a little bit lower than I thought it was going to. So in going back to the risers, to finish these risers up, that stencil that I put on there is a little bit raised because we put paint on top of another item. So what I'm going in is I'm going to do a few coats of the polyacrylic. I want that not to feel raised, I want it to feel nice and smooth. And then I'll take that same lighter sponge and just buff off, getting any of that texture that the spray might have left behind. I tell you, I am loving this nice find from Goodwill, just enough to take that bumpiness off from the spray and leave it nice and smooth, and then finish them up with a coat of Varathane finishing wax. I'll be doing the same exact thing to the other signs that I painted the stencil on, spraying with polyacrylic, finish them up with some Varathane finishing wax. I didn't sand these, I wanted them to look nice and black. Now we needed to go in and put hangers back on. We took the hangers off. I love to sell my items with hangers. We are blessed to have pegboard in our booth, so we are able to hang stuff to display for sale. So Chris is just going back in and adding some hangers back on. So we are on the home stretch. I'm almost finished with all these wall decor items. For this wood, an item that reminds me of pallet wood, if you watch my videos and you see my window flips or putting pallet wood in frames, I do a dry brush technique. And this is exactly what this wood reminds me of. It reminds me of pallet wood. Now that I've got it nice and dark, I think that's a little bit more detail for this wood. I'm just going in with a dry brush. That means I've taken as much paint as I possibly can get off the brush and just letting it hit any of the raised bumpy areas of this wood. And then on the sides, because it doesn't have a frame, I'm really letting it hit that corner, kind of like a distressing when we're sanding. I'm really letting that paint hit to emphasize that it almost looks like a frame, but it's not really a frame, just emphasizing the sides of this piece. Now, because this is not a framed piece, I felt like it needed some more. A lot of times when I do the pallet wood in the frame or the windows, I sell it separately because it's not cost efficient to put a wreath in. But since that piece was only a little bit more than $5, it doesn't have a frame, I feel the need to add a wreath. So I have not made one of the wreaths for you in a long time. Lavender is in season. It sells well for me, but I have to be careful not to put a terrible lot. I really like full wreaths, but they don't sell if I have to put the price tag on them. So I just use an embroidery hoop. I know you crafters are, embroidery hoops are really in right now, and I have quite a hoard. So we'll see if I can have time to fit in doing anything else to them. So all I do is I go in with my nippers and the Walmart lavender and snip just to that wire, making individual pieces. And I start off with the dollar store wire, and then I wrap it around, bending that wire. I don't cut it into little pieces because I want that wire to be that's left on the lavender to be able to be something that I can wrap around. I go around the bottom, and then I also go into that second stem also, that way it's curving with the embroidery hoop. I don't think it matters where you start around the wreath. It's a round object. You're going to have to make a complete circle anyway. So what I'm doing here is then I match up that center part of the lavender to the bottom of where I've already wired it on, and I do a couple turns of the wire on that, and then a couple 3 turns on that bottom to make sure that it's nice and secure, and I'm pulling it very tight. I want to be able to make sure that these pieces are not going to fall off, and then just keep working my way down the wreath. And then when you get closer to completing your circle, you have to lift that other piece up, that the first piece that you put on, wiggle it into so it is tucked in behind, that you don't have that sharp edge sticking out. And then, yep, you just have to go in there, separate those branches so you're not pushing those down with the wire. So you kind of have to keep going in and lifting them up, but make sure you get that last piece in there nice and tight. So you see, as I'm doing this, I left those 3 stems, so I used 3 pieces of that lavender at $1.47 a piece. So now I'm going back in with, because now this year we have this extra beautiful Walmart lavender too. I'm going to have some accessory pieces to give some dimension to this piece, because I have 2 different lavenders now. Now this piece is at 3 something, I can't remember right offhand. So I'm still trying to remember my cost, so I know what the cost is of how I have to resell this to get my money back and hopefully make some profit. So I'm just going in and cutting off I want to make sure that I have wire, because these will be thin enough that I'll be able to tuck them in. But can you see how long I left that wire at the bottom? That way I can tuck it in and I can wrap it around. This gets a little bit more tricky because you don't want to smush those other lavender pieces down. You still want to wire these pieces in so nothing falls apart. You can use hot glue also if you choose to. Sometimes hot glue gets a little bit messy, so I like to just, if it has wires, leave them in there. Leave the wire nice and long so I can tuck it in and really work it in, way it's a nice tight fit, and I just work my way back around the wreath. I don't have to do as tight of a package, just to make it look a little bit more full. So I'm really just laying that extra piece of lavender, that single piece of lavender, and on the middle, and then just tucking it into that other wire. And if I need to wire it in a little bit more because there wasn't enough wire for me to get it into, then I will. But other than that, it's tucking into the other wire nice and securely. I don't cut my wire until the very end. I have it all on there. It's all nice and tight. That way I know that nothing's going to loosen up. So now I will cut the end of the wire and I will wrap it a couple times in itself, like making a knot like you're sewing, just to finish that up and making sure that that sharp edge is going towards the embroidery hoop and not going towards the outer edge, so it does not hurt anybody or mark up somebody's wall. Then after finishing this piece up with some Varathane finishing wax, Chris is going to flip it over. He's going to give a good hanging system on this. This is a heavier piece than those others that would just take those little bitty hangers. He's using these eyelet hanging systems that we get off Amazon and some heavy wire. Like I said, this is a heavier piece, so you don't want it to break off or fall down. And then after figuring out where center is, you don't want to try to measure center when you're doing a wreath like this because of the way the branches all stick out. You have to set it on there, eyeball where you need to, where it will be hanging a center on it once you've hung it up. And then he's going back in and just doing a little hook, pre-drilling, and putting that hook in there so that it has a place to hang. So I thank you so much for watching today's video, and what was your favorite? And did we inspire you in any way to look at thrift store finds in a new way? I thank you so much for watching today's video, and if you were part of our YouTube family, thank you so much. And if you're new to our channel and checking out the content for the first time, please consider hitting that subscription button along with the notification bell. Thanks again for watching.